Hey, it's Daniel from GrowYourMusicStudio.com, and with me is Alyssa from Musicians Playground in Boston, and one of my coaches here at Grow, who kind of leads up the Accelerator coaching program. And we're here in a video, probably long overdue, or a series of videos that are long overdue. Alyssa and I did a number of videos in 2022, 2023 on topics that aren't usually talked about in the music school, music studio world. One of which is one of the most watched videos of the last couple of years, where we talked about holding your clients to contracts. Alyssa has some really interesting opinions about that, and you should go and find that video because it was somewhat controversial. I got a lot of emails about it. But anyway, we're back to talk about, again, topics that aren't really talked about in music studio world. Because the presumption, if you look across all the advice that's given out there across Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and YouTube and podcasts and that sort of thing, is there are two primary ways to solve problems in your studio. Either A, you've got to really, really, really focus on business. You got to learn all this stuff about business and marketing. It's not bad advice. Another vein of advice is, oh, you just need to be more creative. You need to add new programs. You need to turn music lessons into arts and crafts time. And there's a whole raft of advice along that way. Also, not bad advice. There's a lot of good thinking in there. There is a third way, and it's one that I actually think is the most important, that isn't really talked about. And that is what this series of videos is about. Because what I truly believe is that looking at my past and knowing Alyssa's story, which she shared somewhat on our podcast, my business problems weren't directly solved by working on my business. The biggest problems that I had were internal, and there were ways of going about solving those problems that helped my business grow beyond what I ever imagined possible. And so this series of videos is about getting into some of those tools that both Alyssa and I have experience with and how they can impact your studio business. So Alyssa, you ready to get into it?
I'm ready. I'm excited for this one, Daniel. Long overdue.
Yeah. Because today's topic is about something that's so far removed, as I've been saying, like so far removed from music studio world and Google ads, Facebook ads, how often should I post on Instagram, like that style of advice, and really getting to maybe the most important tool that was ever taught to me by a business coach. And it's a technique called the work. And it's originated by a really powerful woman named Byron Katie, and was first made available to the world, this technique that she invented, in a book called Loving What Is. Have you read this, Alyssa? I'm curious.
Oh, yes. Yes, many
Okay.
times. So, Daniel, what are experiences or situations that studio owners may go through on a frequent basis that this episode is going to help them to navigate?
That's a good question. I'm going to tell a brief story to really drive this point home. I first became aware of the coach that I worked with for a long time, and I hired him to help me grow my business. And in the first call I had with him, he asked a bunch of questions that I thought had nothing to do with the business. And about 45 minutes into that call, I was like legitimately in tears, because what he helped me to see was that my obsession with productivity and efficiency was actually really, really stressing me out and preventing me from making decisions that would help my business grow. So he even said to me during that call, Daniel, I don't know if I've met someone who's as time conscious as you. Like, I don't know if you can get more productive. I don't know if I have a client that get more productive, but I don't think that's your problem. And the fact that you're obsessed with it means that you're not, I'm paraphrasing, but you're not focused on the thing that would actually help you grow your business. Because I'd been stuck for a while. This was over a decade ago. Another story, I had a client last year that was so beset with anxiety around their future growth prospects that it was shutting them down emotionally on a day-to-day basis, and they were going to a lot of coping mechanisms to deal with it, and their business hadn't grown in years.
Hmm.
I didn't talk to them at all about business for the first couple months that we were coaching together, her obviously being my client. And she grew her year over year income by 80 grand in 6 months after we dealt with the stress.
Wow.
So she went well over six figures in under 6 months because we basically got her unstuck.
Mm-hmm.
I had another client who couldn't make business decisions that would help her business because she was controlled by the opinions of another family member. Not like a spouse or someone in the immediate family, but someone in the extended family. And so we didn't talk about Google Ads. We didn't talk about posting on Instagram. We didn't talk about going to group lessons. We dealt with the issue of how they were perceiving that person's influence in their life and the stress it was causing. And we spent a while on that. And we solved this issue, and then the business starts growing. This is not traditional advice. You're not going to see a lot about this on Music Studio Instagram. You're not going to see a lot of this in the Facebook groups for music studio owners or academy owners. You probably aren't even going to hear this in a lot of programs that are out there, supposed to help you grow your business, including some of the marketing trainings that Grow offers or group lesson trainings. This is stuff where when people are ready to get serious about stress in their life or anxiety, or they know they're behaving in a neurotic way, or they have time management issues, productivity issues, when you start digging to that deeper layer of business, it's interesting what gets discovered, and it's interesting how you can't separate the human from the business that the human is operating. You fix the human, you fix the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost as if really anything that we go through as studio owners that we find to be difficult, challenging, really those sources of a lot of emotional burden, that what we're about to talk about is a really great framework, one of those like tools in our toolboxes, if you will, to help get us through those challenges. And as you're pointing to, someone can know everything about how to run and build a business, but if personally they're not up to par for that challenge, if they don't have the tools to navigate things on the emotional, psychological side, then they're not going to be able to grow past that sticking point. So, this framework that we're about to dive into is going to help them, would you say, with any and all of those kinds of situations, whether it's the ones that you described or even things as small as, you'd be surprised, things as small as customers violating policies and needing to advocate for yourself or your business and go against that client, like you were just saying earlier, or maybe in team issues, people that you're working with or for, or they're working for you, and you're having problems navigating challenges of differences of opinions, right? So I'd say that this is pretty wide, but the one thing that holds everything together and what we're about to discuss is that if it's a source of emotional challenge, difficulty, stress, burden, that what we're about to talk about is a really fantastic tool to learn to get through that. Would you say that?
Oh, 100%. And just to even echo something you said there, that's an issue I deal with all the time. Fear of customers, fear of team members, fear of partners, fear of other people's opinions. That one comes up all the time with music studio owners.
Right. And those are like, I like to tell my clients, death by a thousand paper cuts, because while they're little tiny interactions and they seem small on the surface level, they end up echoing a lot of really deep things within us that we're not aware of a lot of times if we're not doing this kind of work. The work, right? So what's interesting is we take for granted how actually big these issues can be, how much stress can add up from these little interactions, little interactions. And by letting each day pass and not having these tools developed, it can really turn into the situations you're talking about earlier, where someone stays stuck in their finances or financial growth rather, for years at a time, or they literally are so anxious they end up needing to shut their whole business down, right? So Daniel, I want to get into it. I want to hear about your experience with the work. And I know we're going to be talking about Byron Katie, but you are so familiar with this tool, and it's one that, through coaching alongside you in SGA, that I've become super familiar with as well, and I've given a lot of my clients. Tell us, what is this? What is this tool? Who is Byron Katie?
Yeah, Byron Katie is a figure worth exploring, and there's plenty of YouTube videos on YouTube. There's plenty of videos on YouTube where she kind of gives her backstory, but essentially and she's getting up there in age now, but in the 80s, she was going through an abusive situation, um, suffered like a mental breakdown, like this sort of thing. And her story is that she came up with these questions to help her discern truth from untruth, to discern reality from a fiction she was spinning in her mind. And the work is quite simple, actually. It's a series of questions that you ask about thoughts that you're having in your head, because her contention is that reality is neutral. It's the story we put on top of reality that determines our lived experience.
Mm.
So here's an example. This studio parent seems to be really angry right now, and they're complaining about my makeup policy. That is a fact. You can observe that in reality. But the story I put on top of that could be vastly different depending on my natural personality, whether or not I know a tool like the work, things of that nature. So, one story you could say, and this is often subconscious, one story you could put on that is, oh my word, this person's going to tell everyone in town that I'm so inflexible and it's going to ruin our business, and they're going to talk to everyone else in the studio, and I'm going to get like half of my students quitting if I don't, like, because this was a problem parent. And if I don't like give in to them, like it's going to be bad for me. That's one story.
Hmm.
And if you believe that story, it's very likely that you will make choices about how you deal with this situation in line with the story you're telling yourself. But all of that is invented. That isn't actually true. Even if this same person has done that in the past, you don't know if it's true or not, if they will do this, or what the outcome will be. Similarly, you could have a different story where you hear this person complaining to you and how they think this policy is unfair, and that how dare you not give me this makeup lesson. She was sick that day. I was so beside myself with anxiety. She had a terrible fever. It was like 102 degrees. And the last thing I was thinking at that time was, oh, I better follow your makeup policy rules. Like the parent's literally saying this to you. And you could say in your own head, I wouldn't say this out loud to the parent, but interesting. It's interesting that this person thinks this way, and not have a narrative that you put on top of what this person's saying. That's a much healthier way of dealing with this. And what I will say is that over time, for me, utilizing a tool like the work, I have begun to see my own internal negativity, and seen it so much now that a lot of times I can process this stuff in real time and not even go there in my own head, which has made my overall experience of living life a lot lighter and a lot more fun. And there's a lot less narrative in my head. There's a lot less anxiety and neuroticism, which I was
Mm.
prone to when I was younger. So that's kind of a description of what the work is. She has, and this is all available online. It's not like she's hiding it. You can very easily find what the questions are. There are free tutorials on YouTube of how to actually do the work process. And honestly, we're not going to get into the depths of that in here. Like, this is something we teach our coaching clients. It's something that we teach inside the accelerator, because a lot of times, even knowing what the questions are and how to use it, a lot of people struggle to understand if they're doing it the right way. And I spend time with clients helping them to utilize this tool. And even some of the examples I gave earlier of past clients of mine, they were ones that I taught this technique that helped relieve the anxiety they were feeling around some of the issues they were dealing with. And that was time well spent. Way better than teaching them how to do Google Ads. Though I think teaching people how to do Google Ads is a total power move for any studio. That's just how highly I think of something like this. So does that answer the question, Alyssa, or do you have any follow-up, or do you have something to add for yourself?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would like to actually just also add that back to the example you were giving about the person who's angry about the makeup policy. Even that is an interpretation. So when we start to dive into the work, we realize, wow, really the only objective fact is that this person is telling me that they were not aware of my makeup policy or that they don't agree with my makeup policy. But the fact that we're interpreting this person to be angry is also a level of, as you said, interpretation or of superimposition of our own reality
Good word.
onto theirs, right?
Yeah.
And so I like to think about the work as a tool for helping us to see better. It's like going to the eye doctor and they test your eyesight, right? And you get a score. Some of us from that score need some glasses. Some of us do not, right? Lucky ones.
Mhm.
But the work is what really helps us to get the right pair of glasses on and see things for what they are, see things much more clearly. Because without the work or without diving into, well, what is objective and what is subjective? What is that superimposition that's happening? Where does that start, right? Without doing that, we're essentially seeing things with really blurry lenses or without lenses at all when we need them, right? So I see the work as a way to see our world and others around us more clearly. And a lot of times we might come from a set of life experiences, business experiences, what have you, that have shaped us as who we are as people today, our personality, as we would call it, which is, by the way, totally dynamic. And that's what we're alluding to. These tools can help us to develop, be dynamic, and change. But we have a lot of things that we would call ourselves, our personality, our unique set of preferences. These things have been built across years and years and years of various conditioning, experiences, and people. And so we might, instead of seeing this person who's saying, I did not know about your makeup policy or I don't agree with it, instead of seeing that as, oh, they're trying to understand me more clearly and why this policy exists, or, oh, they're just trying to simply express themselves, we see this person's angry. And so then that sets off a whole other host of reactions in you that then may incite more behavior from them to prove that they're angry, right? So there's a whole chain effect here that can happen. And it's quite interesting that really what the work does is it helps us to identify that one point of where it's about to move from objective to subjective. And you're not fully clear in how you're seeing that situation. Would you agree with that, Daniel?
Yeah. And that's what the questions in the work helped you to uncover once you know how to utilize them correctly.
So, what would you say are, if people decide to look into the work and really study it and use it, what is maybe one or two things that they can
Hmm.
do that starts to get them along the lines of practicing something like the
Sure.
work that will help them to start to navigate these tricky, big and small situations that we all face as studio owners on the emotional level?
Yeah. So, first off, here's a gauge to know how if you need to use this tool. If you find yourself stressed, overwhelmed, don't have enough time, if you often feel yourself, if you hear yourself saying this or you feel those feelings, chances are this will be very good for you. I'll start there. Second, I'm just going to start with the first question. Is it true? So the key to making this tool work for you is to get a very clear statement of what you believe to be true. A lot of times when I'm listening to a client, and I'm not saying this in a bad way or a pejorative way or making a judgment against someone, but a lot of times a client just kind of talked for 8 to 10 minutes and they're telling me all their feelings and it's here and it's there and like all these things and then they kind of go off in the left field about this one thing. It's they haven't made the problem clear for themselves. So the first step is just have a clear understanding of what the problem actually is. Boil it down to one sentence. Okay. I was thinking of ending this chat of ours with a story of like the most impactful way that I use the work ever over the last almost decade of knowing this tool. It might actually be appropriate to say here,
Okay.
um, or it might be appropriate to kind of bring this in here. because one of my statements at one point of time where I was still kind of struggling to feel as if I was good at business or was able to cause my business to grow was that I was getting frustrated where I felt that more people should be utilizing my services. Like I knew I was good. The people who were working with me were telling me I was good, but it seemed like whenever I met new people, they were very skeptical of working with me. And so I had all these stories running around my head about what was true and what the problem could possibly be and how I could fix it, but I boiled it all down to one statement. These people should hire me. That's how I boiled it down. That is a very clear statement to utilize in this tool. To go back to what we said earlier, a statement that someone might make around that makeup policy or maybe a difficult interaction with a parent is people should just obey my makeup policy. People should. These parents should just obey the policy. So, well, I'll go back to mine. Is it true? Should these people just pay me? And again, the most impactful thing that has ever happened in my business was actually going through and answering some of these things that I just accepted without any kind of self-reflection. Because is it true that these people should just pay me? I can't know that for sure. And if I'm being honest, and this is getting deeper into the technique, I don't know if any one person should pay me or not. Not truly. Not really. I don't know. It might actually be bad for them.
So I want to make sure that this is super clear for the listener in
Okay.
this. So let's say they ask, okay, we hear the provoking statement of, okay, time to
Provoking.
use the
Yeah.
work, which is the word should. I love when Tony
Right.
Robbins says we need to stop shoulding all over ourselves, right? So should is a really powerful word because when used against ourselves or when used against others, it maintains that there is this unwritten set of rules that people need to be abiding by that are often not even communicated, right? And so I want to ask, back to what you were just sharing, once somebody hears that word, either they're using it against themselves. I should go to the gym more often. I should make more time for my family. I should, whatever. Or against others, they should comply with my policies. They should show up on time. They should care about my business the way I care about it. Once they use that word, they become aware that they've used that word. And obviously, in using that word, there's probably an internal experience of anger, frustration, of wanting to fight with the reality of what's going on, right? Which is all about what this tool helps us to manage. What do you recommend then that they do from there? So they've recognized the word, they've used it, they're feeling the feelings of having that expectation in place that's not matching with reality. What next? What do they do next with that?
Well, I think that's where it gets into where these questions take you next, because it isn't just one question. In fact, I'm just going to say the 4 questions right now that Byron Katie has people ask. Is it true? Can you absolutely know it's true? What happens when you believe the thought? And who would you be without that thought? Okay, this is kind of esoteric. This is like out there. So I'm just going to walk through it. It is difficult for people to admit that what they're thinking is wrong. Daniel really believed that these people should pay him. But the answer to every question is you always need to be saying, no, it's not true. There's no other answer than no. And if you're saying yes, then you need to reflect longer because we can't know. Even difficult questions. Should my business partner have stolen $20,000 out of our account? Is it true? Is it always true?
Can you walk? I'm actually
Well, I don't
fascinated.
know if I want to get into that one, but the idea is to challenge. And this is where, like a 30-minute video that we put out isn't going to is not going to get into the depths of this. This is why people work with us. Because it is difficult to admit sometimes that the things that we most deeply believe, we might need to let go of them. And I'm going to give a really practical reason why here. Because in reality, when this is pragmatic, this doesn't have to do necessarily with this process. But when you just blindly believe that something's true, it actually shuts down your creativity. And the way you solve these problems is by opening yourself up to possibilities that you have not considered before. And a good way of doing that is to stop believing something that maybe you've believed for 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years. You just believed for 20 years that people shouldn't argue with you about your makeup policy. And now you're bitter about it. Is that bitterness really serving you? Is it helping you solve a problem? If the same thing keeps happening over and over again, and your response to it is just, well, these people shouldn't be doing it. Have you really actually solved the problem? Is that helping you to think that? It really isn't. So you need to consider for a second that maybe they shouldn't just blindly follow your policy. Maybe some creativity is deployed because maybe there's something that you're doing that's causing this reaction in them. And by you just assuming that they should just blindly believe everything you say, well, interesting. That's kind of what you're doing too, isn't it, studio owner? Isn't that what you were doing, Daniel, when you were upset when people were questioning your policy? And the way that I solved that problem, and really in the last years that I didn't have people fighting me over my policy, was that my relationship to my own policy and how they should respond to it greatly changed because I opened myself up to the possibility that maybe people just shouldn't blindly believe what Daniel tells them to do. Maybe he needs to be a little more sympathetic and compassionate. And maybe while you're doing that, you can find a way of avoiding the problem at all while being actually even harder on your policies than most people are. And that's actually what was true in my studio. I actually had some ironclad policies. I never made exceptions on certain ones of them. And I had fewer fights over it because of how I changed and how I talked about it, which I allowed myself the opportunity to be creative about it when I just stopped saying, well, they should just do it. Does that help?
I think I might also maybe add or clarify as well that part of it is, okay, we go along in life with these expectations, right?
Yes.
People shouldn't quit my program, right?
Yes. Good
Um,
one. Hear that one all the
so
time.
Right. I mean, these are all very common scenarios. Again, death by 1,000 paper cuts. These create a lot of stress internally for our business owners or studio owners that they carry with them, and it compounds and compounds and compounds, so that when the 10th person's quitting, we're feeling the reverberation of all 10 people who quit in the past, month as that person quits. Right.
Yeah.
So what I would like to say is that, how about a reframe instead of turning it on ourselves and saying, well, we have to change our approach or policy? Because I also don't want to generalize on this podcast and almost borderline gaslight our studio owners as well, because maybe their policies are perfectly fine and fair in what they stand by. And the truth is, just because we as people have policies or ways that we operate doesn't mean that others are going to abide by those or respect those or prefer those same things or ways of being, right? So where the work comes in is it helps to remind us that it's not true that everybody's going to have the same beliefs or the same needs as ourselves, right? And so what this does is it frees everybody to operate as they would wish. But then what is the power that we as business owners have? One, we could say, instead of, like you were saying, we could shift our belief or our frame, and we could say, well, actually, what if I do the work? I ask, is it true that they should be doing this? And I arrive at, no. I mean, I'm reluctantly, no. I do kind of wish everybody could be like this, but no, it's not true. Not everybody's going to be able to stay in my program forever, right? Well, then what? Oh, well, what if it freed us up by doing the work to feel just ever so slightly more resourceful and better, where then we might even embrace a different viewpoint, such as, it's true that people will definitely quit my program. It's a gravity issue. This is what I call a gravity issue with my clients. People will come to me crying in sessions over things, and I ask them, do you believe there's a world where we can be a business owner and everybody's going to love our business? Do you believe that? Is that true? How is holding that belief serving you? Is that a fantasy? Is that magical thinking? Right?
Mm.
And so what I think the work does is it helps us to free up and say, what if I walk around believing it's absolutely going to be true that people will quit my program, and that, that my job is to see how long I can keep them to stay in the meantime. That's a much more realistic frame of mind to be operating from as a business owner. And it's one that when those requests to cancel or to quit come through, we see it and say, okay, this is part of the reality that I know I've signed up for, right? So I feel that the work is super powerful to get us started in that. And like you were saying, that the creative, the resourceful thinking is actually coming to see things that happen to us or to our business or within our business as part of a different set of reality that maybe we can start to embrace a bit more openly by doing something like the work. It opens us up, as you're saying, to consider other possibilities. That's the power of it.
So this might actually be a good place as we kind of maybe move into the close here to wrap this up with the greater story, because I think people can hear something like this and think, yeah, they said at the beginning that this really doesn't have a lot to do with growing your business, and I actually believe it now. This all sounds like super woo-woo. And I've had over time maybe a very small percentage of clients who are quite skeptical of it. Most clients working with me are open to something that I'm so passionate about, that I saw such a huge change, because there is a story I tell my clients that when they hear it, I think they hear the authenticity in it, and it opens them up to at least learning this. And then the long-term effect I see on them is pretty profound, and has been for a long time in the work that I do with people. And this is the story, which is that I grew up in a family that had a lot of anxiety around money. And I inherited that. Not the money. We didn't have any. No, I inherited the anxiety. And you take on unexamined the assumptions and the worldview that your parents give you. And it's only when you get in your 20s and 30s that you actually begin to say, oh, wait, my parents, like you already know that your parents weren't right about everything, but you don't know the stuff that got deep down in there that you inherited from them, so to speak. Those attitudes, those worldviews, those things that you just don't examine. And so as I was a very, very hard worker through my 20s, I'd only grown my business to a certain size. And while it was a size that most people that I work with now would say like, oh man, I would love to be there, I knew I was capable of more, and I felt very frustrated that I was not growing. And I couldn't understand why. Enter Dave, the coach that I worked with for a long time, nearly 5 years. And he met me. He heard my story. He knew what I thought the problem was. But as he got to know me more, he began to see what the true problem was. And that's the sign of a really good coach. They begin to hear your worldview, and they look at where you say you want to be, and then they compare it to what you're saying and doing and how you're being, the effects of the thinking that you have, and they begin to see the mismatch between the two. And a good coach will look at where you want to be and then look at how you're behaving and say, I don't think this behavior is going to help you get to there in 3 years. Mm-hmm. Dave saw that in me. And what he saw was a lot of anxiety around money, a chip on my shoulder around money, a fear of money even. Mm-hmm. He teaches me the work. And on October 4th, 2016, I know it because it's still in my notes. I refer to this often with clients of mine. I sat down at this desk in this office, and I worked through a series of statements that took me months to come up with, because these deep-seated beliefs about money and my relationship to it were so buried that it was actually very difficult to even know what I believed. Like, it had to be uncovered. And he helped me in that process. I don't think I could have done it on my own. But then I was doing work outside of my sessions with him and learning things about myself. And I went through this series of statements, one of which is these people should see how valuable what I have for them is. And I worked on it, went through the questions, went even through some questions that I even talked about here. Again, there's free materials online that tell you what all those questions are. He helped me understand how to use them correctly, because I was doing it wrong. Naturally, a lot of people do. And the stress that I often carried around money evaporated, went away. in that moment. Like I felt a lot lighter after like going through and doing like this mental work. It was kind of even energetically taxing.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, that feels good. Go about my day. Next day, feel the same. Next day, feel the same. I would go through these cycles where I would like be freaked out about money and my bank account size and like that sort of thing, and then would kind of forget about it, or I would numb myself to it, anesthetize myself to it, cope.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I would go through these cycles, of like sheer terror over, oh my word, I suck at business, I'm angry at the world, like all this sort of thing, and then like be okay. Maybe I'd have like a win that week, and I would forget about it. I would be like on a high, but it was like this
Roller coaster.
roller coaster. Great word,
Yeah.
Alyssa. Yeah, I was going to use like a word that probably wasn't nearly as
I
evocative
saw
as that
you. I
one.
saw where you were going with that.
Yeah, you saw it. Anyway, long story short, here's what happens. It didn't come back. Not in the way I'd felt it before. I actually forget what it feels like to be what I was at that time. Thank the universe, thank God, like whatever word you want to put in there.
It's literally a feeling of being out of control, like out of control. You
Yeah,
feel
yeah,
no
and
sense.
yeah, and what I will say is, I think we're all cracked in certain ways, and to some degree, there's no way I'll ever fully escape or remove myself entirely from what decades of my life living in that place is. But what I will tell you is that things that would like tiny things that would have stressed me out and put me at like a stress level 7, I've experienced stresses that legitimately much bigger than that feel like a 1 to me now. Like it's just the volume got turned down on this
Yeah.
because I kept working at it. It's why it's called the work. And so here's the point, and this is where I think if you hear something, hear this very, very clearly. At that point in time, I'd never broken a certain barrier in my income. I'd never made more than X number of dollars in a single month take home ever. I
Mm-hmm.
was 34 years old. No, wait, no, hold on. Yeah, 34 at the time. 8 weeks after this, in a single month, I made double that. I don't think that happens if I'm carrying around these old attitudes about money.
Right.
It just
Right.
doesn't happen. And actually, I won't even go a level deeper than that. It's because if I'm carrying around those stresses and those attitudes, the entire way that I think about opportunity in the world will be different. The entire way that I assess risk in the world will be entirely different. Will be different. The the stress that I feel because of the story I'm telling myself is entirely different, and therefore all my decisions are different. And that's why I never could break certain barriers. I had an emotional capability that
Mm-hmm.
was capping me.
Yeah. We
And
self
when I blew the
sabotage. We
yeah,
self
self
sabotage.
sabotage is a great way of putting it too. Like that's the flip side of that coin. And when I blew the cap off of what that was,
Yeah.
then I go through the roof.
Right.
Then
Because
it's like all of a sudden I'm behaving and making decisions in a completely different way that grew
yeah.
this business immensely.
Right. Because you're challenging those limiting beliefs through this process, right? And one of a great book, by the way, I know that this is an aside because we're here talking about the work, but a wonderful book for anyone listening that is interested in what you just said and going really deep into how are the ways that we get in our own way, but purposefully, aka self-sabotaging, is The Mountain Is You. It was an incredible read. I've read it twice now, and every time I read it, I just see different gems in it that speak to me based on what I'm going through in that moment. But it's so true that we subconsciously are afraid of a lot of things, and we are keeping ourselves in a reality that's keeping us safe on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes our behaviors, our reactions are obviously habitual or part of our conditioning, and they're doing that from a good or positive intention, but from a past version of ourselves. And so, in order to break through what you're calling your past version, we have to have these tools in place to kind of chisel through those layers that are trying to keep us safe, but actually keeping us protected from the next version of ourselves that we're meant to become, that next reality that we're meant to live. And if we don't do that, we do find ways to plateau either consciously or subconsciously. And also, it keeps this like cycle perpetuated of like this why can't I do more? And that breeds more stress and more kind of inactivity, right? And retreat. And so I think it's just such a beautiful thing to see that this process can be the start of people starting to chisel away at those walls that are trying to keep them protected, but unfortunately are also preventing them from what they're destined to be. And it
Yeah.
sounds like that
What they're
this
capable
process
of.
has done that for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Personally, Daniel, I'll just say this before we end too, that it's not just a great tool for ourselves as professionals. Personally, I know you've kind of alluded to your family, your money story, and how that's affected your business. And like we opened this with, we don't have business problems, we have us problems, right? Uh, I've found the work to be really important for anyone listening who has had a fairly complicated family history for
Mm.
personal things. I was carrying around a lot of frustration, a lot of sadness, a lot of disappointment around ways that I have, felt my family has or has not shown up for me. And
Mm.
it allowed me, by using this process, to do things like ask myself, is it true that I'm owed this by these people? Is it true that they need to be the way I want them to be versus the way that they truly are? Right. And by using this process, it allowed me to almost let these people off the hook. And in doing that, it freed me up, because it freed me up to also let myself off the hook from sitting in that role of expecting people to show up and be different. And then once I was free of that, imagine all this new bandwidth that I then had to walk away and find who it was I wanted to be genuinely, and who it was that could genuinely show up and come to the table and be that for me. And so that created an incredible cycle for me of letting go of things and people that were not meant for me. Again, because I was doing what I was doing and without challenging that for so long, I was trying to keep myself safe. But by using this tool, by coming out of that shell, I've moved into a life and a version of myself that feels far more genuine, far more lighter, far more powerful, far more confident. And that was only because I could use a process like this to challenge my beliefs around things and people, right? So I'll end it with that and just say it's also a phenomenal tool for anybody who's struggling on the personal level as well.
Yeah. And just even adding on to that as we wrap, this is the appropriate place to say that one of the first things that I deal with and that I know you deal with when I'm working with someone new is just to really get a sense of where they're going, what they believe to be the obstacles around that, get real clarity on that, and then to start listening.
Yeah.
Because I like to deal with people's stress at first, those deeply held beliefs that I see are holding them back, that, got to be honest, sometimes we can't see for ourselves. I don't want anyone hearing this discussion between you and I thinking like, oh, Daniel now believes that he's like super enlightened and he's like this, or Alyssa believes this because they understand this tool. Um, Somehow they're like farther along in consciousness. That's not it. The reason I still hire coaches is because I can't see for myself what I can't see.
Yeah.
And if I'm stuck, if I'm plateauing in an area of my business or my personal life or something like that, if anything, if there's anything I could congratulate myself on, it's just that I now see it faster. Like I go hire someone to help me fix it faster.
Yes.
Whereas before I was very skeptical of other people. I always assumed that people were trying to scam me, which is its own thing you need to deal with the work. Look, if you believe everyone's out to scam you, you need to question that belief.
Ah,
But that was me too. That was me in my 20s. Because again, poor attitudes about, you know, entrepreneurship and money, growing up with a family that just assumed everyone was out to get them, trying to scam you out of money. Yeah, that was part of my story. Might be
yeah.
part of someone who's listening as well. And I feel bad because I know that particularly will hold a person back, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
anyway,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So I think essentially what we're trying to say is this tool is really great, not only for the day-to-day issues that pop up. And again, I keep calling it death by a thousand paper cuts, but it's those things that are part of our reality as being a business owner professionally, but also I think what we're trying to say as well, and what we agree on, is that this tool can also be really incredible for challenging longer held, deeper limiting beliefs that can begin to really shake things up. So, and that we're not perfect, we're two people having a conversation together who are passionate about working with people and helping to free them up to live more joyously, more easefully, and more powerfully. But at the end of the day, no one's perfect, right? And you and I are also on our own journey of using this and seeing kind of how it's able to be used for different purposes. So, yeah.
If this is intriguing to you, just reach out. There's a contact button on our website. We have a billion different social channels, and you can direct message myself or Alyssa. Just ask a question. If you're stressed about your business, reach out. If you'd like to make more money, reach out. I am in a place in my career where it feels easier than ever. I'm happier than ever. I have more pressure on me than ever, and I feel it less than ever.
Mm-hmm.
I've got more people reporting to me. I'm, more leverage, and yet I'm less, really not stressed out. I want that for everyone. Deep down, it's why I do what I do now. Like, 10 years ago when I first started Grow, and it was just me, didn't even have an assistant yet, because again, my limiting beliefs about delegation, we could do a whole episode on that. Um, I knew I had something to share, and it was through the process of working with so many people and seeing that often what was holding them back wasn't the head knowledge. It was just all the internal stuff. And I wanted tools to help people address that, because just like with my piano students who I wanted to get through their books as fast as possible, and I knew that me teaching dotted quarter notes marginally better wasn't going to help solve that problem. There are deeper things going on with these kids that I need to address to help them do this. The same thing's true of studio owners. The same thing's true of the problems that they have. I can teach Google Ads, but the real stuff that has helped people the most has been this. And that's how we started the episode. And that's what I want for people. I just want them to be calm. I want them to be happy. I want them to have these tools. And this isn't the only tool that we're going to talk about in this series of videos. The work is a huge one, maybe the biggest in the pantheon of tools that I give people, and help them work with. But at the end of the day, I would wish what I know you've got, Alyssa, in terms of your businesses that you're running and what I have. And it's just been a real joy to pass that on to folks.